Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
Axion 9 was a world where even the light went to die. The searchlights from the watchtowers carved through the perpetual twilight like surgical blades, revealing the rusted skeletal structures of the mines below. These ancient excavations resembled the fossilized remains of enormous beasts that had crawled from the planet's core only to die on its surface. The air carried the metallic tang of blood-rich ore, the chemical burn of industrial runoff, and the unmistakable sweetness of decay that clung to every surface like an invisible film. The prison planet wasn't merely a facility, it was a living, breathing ecosystem of suffering. Deep in the lowest levels, where the darkness was absolute and the air toxic, dwelled the tenebrous crawlers, blind, pale creatures that had evolved in the mines over generations. Their translucent skin stretched taut over elongated limbs, revealing pulsing blue-green veins and organs that glowed faintly in absolute darkness. Their six-jointed legs ended in crystalline claws that resonated against the stone as they moved, a sound prisoners learned to recognize as the prelude to death. What made them truly terrifying wasn't their appearance, but their hunting method. They tracked the chemical signatures of fear itself, drawn to the cortisol and adrenaline released by terrified prey. Veteran prisoners learned to control their emotions as much as their footsteps. Panic was a death sentence more certain than any execution. This was the domain of the Aegis, jailers sculpted by evolution into perfect instruments of order and control. Their biology was a cruel marvel. A complete absence of pain receptors rendered them fearless, tireless, and utterly devoid of compassion. They were walking monuments to cold efficiency, their very existence a testament to indifference. Among the prisoners, a complex society had formed in response to the brutality of their environment. The Grey Brotherhood ruled the social hierarchy, inmates who had survived longest by adhering to their own merciless code. Their bodies were living archives of survival, covered in ritualistic scarification patterns, created with sharpened fragments of mind crystals. Each scar told a story. A horizontal line across the forearm marked a year survived. A spiral on the shoulder signified leadership of a work crew. A series of dots trailing from eye to ear commemorated kills. The Brotherhood spoke their own dialect, a hybrid language incorporating mining jargon, obscure technical terms, and words borrowed from a dozen alien tongues. They controlled everything that moved between cell blocks, medicine, food, information, through an elaborate system of debt and obligation they called the Ledger. New arrivals quickly learned that the Aegis might control the facility's walls, but within those boundaries the Brotherhood's word was law, enforced through methods even the guards found disturbing. Queen Kyra stood motionless on the inspection platform, her obsidian armor absorbing what little light dared to touch it. Her silhouette was like a tear in reality itself, a void given form and purpose. The inmates below averted their gaze, knowing that to lock eyes with the High Overseer was to invite punishment. Her presence was absolute, her authority unquestioned. Before her, forced to his knees in the filth of the parade ground, was Marco. Unlike the cowering masses of prisoners surrounding him, his eyes held a quiet defiance. A former neurochemical research medic, his crime had been more calculated than mere insubordination. He had been assigned to a military black site, where he discovered the true nature of the chemical byproducts being synthesized, compounds specifically designed to target the central nervous system of rebel populations, causing gradual, irreversible neural degeneration that mimicked natural disease. When he refused to participate and attempted to expose the program, the Empire ensured his research would never reach the public. They branded him a traitor and sentenced him to Axion 9, where he would be forced to mine the very compounds he had refused to weaponize, a calculated irony that revealed the Empire's cruel sense of justice. His hands and threadbare prison uniform were caked with this viscous, caustic chemical sludge, a substance whose molecular structure he had memorized during his research. The compound was engineered to penetrate neural barriers, its molecular configuration specifically designed to bypass standard protective measures. Marco knew its properties better than anyone else alive, including the effects it could have on various biological systems when catalyzed by different materials. "Slave," Kyra's voice sliced through the silence, amplified and distorted by the vox grill of her helmet. "You have defiled my platform with your presence. Kiss my boot as a sign that you know your place." Her tone was flat, devoid of emotion, Not cruel, but something worse. Utterly unconcerned with the suffering of others. Hundreds of inmates held their breath collectively. This was Kyra's favorite pastime, breaking those who still clung to some shred of dignity. Some of the older prisoners looked away, having witnessed this ritual many times before. They knew what happened to those who refused. Marco slowly rose. His eyes, weary but analytical, met the soulless visor of her helmet. In that moment, his training as a neurochemist took over. He assessed what he knew about Aegis physiology, their neural structure, the specialized receptor-blocking proteins that prevented pain signals from reaching their consciousness. He considered the molecular composition of the sludge on his hands, with its neural bonding properties designed to bypass protective barriers. Then he noted the distinctive iridescent sheen of her armor. Not standard issue, but a specialized alloy reserved for the highest echelons of Aegis command. During his research years, he had studied classified reports on this exact material. A reactive metal-ceramic composite theoretically vulnerable to certain neural catalysts. The military had abandoned that research path, deeming the vulnerability too minimal to warrant concern. But minimal wasn't the same as non-existent. The compound on his hands contained precisely the binding agents that might, under perfect conditions, temporarily disrupt the alloy's protective properties. It was a 1,000,000 to 1 chance, a desperate scientific gamble. If he was wrong, his death would be immediate and excruciating. If he was right, each step he took forward was measured, purposeful. The silence stretched taut as a wire. He came close, too close for the comfort of the guards, who shifted uneasily. But instead of bowing, instead of submitting, Marco slowly and with deliberate precision raised his chemical-coated hands and wiped them methodically across her boot, ensuring maximum contact between the neurotoxin and the specialized alloy. He wasn't making a symbolic gesture of defiance. He was conducting a high-stakes experiment with the only tools available to him, his knowledge and his desperation. In the next instant, Kyra's world exploded. It wasn't rage that rocked her. It was agony. For the first time in her life, for the first time in the millennia of her race's history, she felt pain. The caustic sludge from Marco's hands reacting with the specialized material of her armor had created a catalyst that momentarily disabled her natural pain filters. Sensations her kind had not experienced since their genesis crashed over her like a primal hurricane. She didn't just feel the chemical burn on her boot. She felt everything. The pressure of the armor against her body, the chill of the metal against her skin, dozens of old unnoticed micro-injuries from past battles. Her entire existence transformed into a symphony of previously unknown torment. A scream tore from her throat, a sound utterly alien to her race, as she collapsed to her knees. Her perfect armor, once the symbol of her invulnerability, now felt like a cage filled with white-hot needles. The prisoners froze in collective shock. The guards, her own Aegis kin, stood paralyzed in utter confusion, their minds unable to process the impossible scene unfolding before them. Their goddess was suffering. In that moment, as Kyra writhed on the platform, clutching at her armor as if trying to tear it away, the power dynamic of Axion 9 shifted irrevocably. The veil of invincibility had been torn away, revealing something the prisoners had never expected to see. Vulnerability in their tormentor. Xander, Kyra's first-in-command, was the first to recover from the shock. In his eyes, usually as cold and lifeless as hers, a fire of ambition ignited. He didn't see a tragedy unfolding before him. He saw opportunity. "She is defective," his voice boomed over the square, authority instantly filling the vacuum left by Kyra's collapse. "The outsider has defiled her. She is weak." He turned to the still stunned guards. "Take her away." Roused from their stupor by the familiar cadence of command, the guards moved to obey their new leader. They seized their former queen roughly, unmoved by her continued writhing as the flood of new sensations overwhelmed her nervous system. Marco, the catalyst of this chaos, was beaten viciously and dragged toward a solitary confinement cell. His face a mask of blood, but his eyes still defiant. A worse fate awaited Kyra. Xander, calculating and cold, knew he couldn't simply execute her. The ancient Aegis Code expressly forbade the killing of a high overseer without formal tribunal and unanimous consent from the Aegis Council. Such a breach would risk rebellion from traditionalist factions, undermining his newly seized authority. But his motivations ran deeper than mere political calculation. Studying her writhing form, Xander felt something new, satisfaction in witnessing her suffering. The pain she experienced now was nothing compared to the psychological agony he intended to inflict. "Seal the broadcast channels," he ordered a communications officer. "No word of this reaches the homeworld until I've established control." He approached Kyra, kneeling to whisper words only she could hear. "Death would be too merciful, too quick. You who prided yourself on perfection will die as what you've always despised, weak, filthy, forgotten. A defect erased from memory." Standing, he declared her unclean and broken, stripping her of insignia and rank before the assembled masses. "Let her know the world she ruled," he sneered, ordering her thrown into a transport headed for the deepest, most dangerous mine shafts. "Let the filth be her shroud." His words carried finality, but also revealed his fatal flaw: pride. He considered her neutralized, incapable of posing any further threat. After all, what could be more helpless than an Aegis who felt pain? Days passed in a blur of agony for Kyra. The initial shock of pain had subsided, leaving only phantom echoes that flared with each new sensation. She was cast into Sector Gamma, the bottom of Axion 9's hell. It was where the hopeless were sent, where inmates died not from starvation, but from toxic fumes and sudden cave-ins that buried dozens at a time. Her armor was gone, replaced with the same threadbare uniform worn by every other prisoner. Her skin, once protected from the harshness of the world, now registered every abrasion, every temperature change, every minor injury. The universe had transformed from a collection of objects to be categorized and controlled into a minefield of sensations that threatened to overwhelm her at any moment. Her first week in Sector Gamma taught her more about vulnerability than millennia of Aegis philosophy. The Grey Brotherhood tested her immediately, surrounding her in a narrow tunnel. Their leader, a mountain of scar tissue and muscle they called Bone Crusher, recognized her despite her changed appearance. The pattern scarred into his flesh told a story of decades survived in the worst depths of Axion 9, each mark a testament to suffering she had never bothered to understand. His eyes, one natural, one a crude prosthetic that glowed faintly orange, narrowed as he studied her. "The Queen falls," he said, voice rasping from years of toxic air. "Should we send her back to her castle? In pieces, perhaps." Several Brotherhood members fingered weapons improvised from mining equipment, eager for retribution. Kyra stood straight, fighting the instinct to revert to her old patterns of intimidation. "Those wouldn't work here. I am no longer queen," she said simply. "I am just another prisoner trying to survive." Bone Crusher's laugh was bitter, hollow. "I remember the day they appointed you overseer. You replaced the old warden. He was cruel but predictable." He stepped closer, towering over her. You brought efficiency, cold as vacuum. Under your command, mortality in this sector rose by 20% because you optimized risk factors. We weren't enemies to you, just defects in the system." The accusation struck with unexpected force. She had indeed implemented those protocols, never considering the human cost of her statistical improvements. "I followed protocol," she replied, the words sounding hollow even to her. "Exactly," Bone Crusher smiled without warmth. "And we survive here by breaking every protocol. You want us to trust you?" He gestured around at his people. "Earn it. Let's see what your protocols are worth when you're alone, without your armor and authority." He turned to his lieutenants. "Give her the water run. Let's see if an Aegis can be useful." The water run, she soon learned, was a suicide mission. Beyond the inhabited tunnels lay a restricted maintenance sector where the prison's water purification system operated. The Brotherhood needed specialized filtration components. Without them, the water in their sector would remain toxic, slowly killing them all. The area was patrolled by automated drones programmed to terminate any unauthorized presence. No prisoner had successfully infiltrated it and returned. "You claim to know systems," Bone Crusher explained with cruel satisfaction. "Prove it. Bring us 3 T7 hydrofilters from Central Processing. You have 12 hours. Marco pulled her aside as the Brotherhood dispersed. "That's impossible," he whispered. "The drones use thermal tracking. They'll detect you immediately." "Not if I understand their patrol patterns," she replied. "I designed them." He studied her face, searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded slowly. I've been watching them for months. They follow a predictable sequence, but with overlapping fields. There's a 3-second gap at junction K12, but you'd need to time it perfectly. For the first time, Kyra felt something like surprise. You've been mapping security patrols. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Know your enemy. Isn't that what you Aegis teach? Together, they formulated a plan. Marco had spent months observing the drones from ventilation shafts, memorizing their movements. Kyra knew their programming, their weaknesses. Neither could succeed alone, but together they identified a possible path. Hours later, Kyra returned to the Brotherhood's territory, 3 cylindrical filters clutched in her hands. Her prison uniform was torn, a deep gash across her shoulder where a drone had nearly caught her. Her blood, flowed freely down her arm. Bonecrusher's expression shifted from shock to grudging respect. Perhaps the queen has claws after all. Not a queen, she corrected him, fighting through the strange new sensation of pain. Just someone with knowledge and help. She glanced at Marco, acknowledging his role in her success. The Brotherhood accepted her after that, if not as one of their own, then at least as a useful asset. She had passed their test, earning a temporary place in their brutal hierarchy. Hour of silence approaching. All prisoners returned to designated safety zones. Backup power initiating in 3 minutes. The automated announcement echoed through the tunnels, triggering immediate response among the prisoners. Bodies pressed together in sheltered alcoves, breath held, movement ceasing entirely. What's happening? Kyra asked, observing the sudden change. Hour of silence, Marco explained quickly, pulling her toward a narrow crevice in the tunnel wall. They shut down the main power grid for system recalibration. Everything goes dark. Lights, barriers, sonic deterrents. That's when the crawlers come. They squeezed into the narrow space as the final warning sounded. Around them, other prisoners pressed into similar hiding spots, their faces masks of controlled terror. Then, with a distinctive powering down hum, the lights died. Darkness, absolute and complete, engulfed the tunnels. In the sudden silence, new sounds emerged. The distant click of crystalline claws on stone. The soft, wet sounds of crawler breathing. The creatures were hunting, drawn from their deep lairs by the sudden absence of the sonic barriers that usually kept them contained. Marco's breathing quickened beside her, his body tensing. Kyra could feel his rising panic, a completely logical response to mortal danger, but one that would doom them both. The crawlers hunted fear. His terror would draw them like a beacon. Control your breathing, she whispered, barely audible. They sense your fear. I can't. His voice caught as the clicking sounds grew closer. A drop of sweat rolled down his temple. Without hesitation, Kyra placed her hand over his mouth, another around the back of his neck. Look at me, she commanded, her voice soft but firm. Focus on my eyes. I feel no fear. They cannot sense me. It was true, despite her newfound capacity for pain, the emotion of fear remained alien to her. Her heart rate remained steady, her body calm. The crawler's specialized senses would register her as nothing more important than the stone walls. Marco's eyes, wide with terror, locked onto hers. She held his gaze, steady and unwavering in the darkness. Breathe with me, she instructed. Slowly, in through your nose. Hold, out through your mouth. She demonstrated, guiding his breathing into a controlled rhythm. Your body obeys your mind. Commanded. Seconds stretched into minutes as a crawler paused just outside their hiding place. Its pale, eyeless head swiveled, sensing, hunting. Kyra could see its internal organs pulsing through its translucent skin, glowing faintly in the darkness. The creature was less than an arm's length away, its claws scratching restlessly at the stone floor. Marco trembled against her, but his breathing had steadied. His eyes remained fixed on hers, using her calmness as an anchor against his own fear. Slowly, the crawler turned away, drawn by easier prey elsewhere in the tunnels. Distant screams confirmed its new target. When the hour of silence finally ended and emergency lights flickered back to life, they emerged from their hiding place. Marco looked at her with new understanding. You protected me, he said, surprise evident in his voice. You protected me from pain, she replied simply. I protected you from fear. We are balanced. Something shifted between them in that moment. a recognition that transcended their former roles. Student and teacher, prisoner and jailer. They were becoming something else, something neither fully understood, but both recognized as necessary for survival. Neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows, Bone Crusher, who had followed them after hearing rumors of their alliance. He had expected to witness the Aegis woman using the medic for her own purposes, perhaps even sacrificing him when convenient. Instead, he had seen something unprecedented, an Aegis protecting a human not from duty or calculation, but from what appeared to be genuine concern. He retreated silently, his scarred face unreadable, but his mind churning with uncomfortable questions. The prison's most fundamental assumption, that the Aegis were incapable of change, suddenly seemed less certain. And if that certainty could be questioned, what other absolutes might crumble? It was here, at the very bottom of the world she had ruled, that she encountered Marco again. He sat against the rough wall of the mine, his face still bearing the marks of his beating. With professional calm that seemed utterly out of place in this environment, he was treating another prisoner's wound, using a strip of cloth and some kind of self-made ointment that smelled of crushed minerals and synthesized compounds. He looked up as she approached, recognition flickering in his eyes. There was no gloating in his gaze, no fear, only a weary understanding that seemed to cut through her defenses more effectively than any weapon. "Welcome to the filth," he said quietly, continuing to dress the wound. "Get used to it. It hurts for everyone here." The simplicity of his statement contained multitudes. It was acknowledgement, warning, and perverse welcome all at once. In those few words, he had summarized her new reality. She was no longer above pain, no longer exempt from suffering. She had joined the ranks of every creature she had ever deemed inferior. Their alliance formed not from choice, but necessity. Kyra, stripped of power and status, was helpless in this world of physical suffering. Marco, experienced enough to know that survival alone was impossible in Sector Gamma, recognized her potential value. She knew guard protocols, patrol routes, security weaknesses, information that could mean the difference between life and death. He became her reluctant teacher in a science her race had always despised, the science of pain. The knowledge Kyra gained came not through lectures, but through a brutal curriculum of experience, a deep mine shaft. Kyra's hand sliced open on crystalline ore, blood, startlingly red against her pale skin, pulsing from the wound in rhythmic spurts. Marco's hands instantly clamping around her wrist, applying pressure at precise points. Her instinct to pull away, to ignore, his grip tightening. "Feel it," he commands. Not the pain, the pattern, the rhythm matching her heartbeat, the specific location of the cut, the way the blood flows. Her body speaking a language she had never learned to understand, a frozen air circulation tunnel. Temperature dropping as life support systems fail in this abandoned section. Her body shaking uncontrollably, teeth chattering. Involuntary responses she'd been taught were signs of weakness. Marco demonstrating rapid friction movements against his own skin. "Survival mechanism," he explains between breaths visible in the frigid air. Not weakness, adaptation. Her reluctant mimicry of his actions. The surprising warmth that follows. The realization that her body knows how to save itself, if only she would listen. A narrow passage near crawler territory, both pressed against the wall, breathing shallow. Marco ready to advance, her hands suddenly gripping his arm, stopping him. No words, only sensation. The almost imperceptible vibration beneath her feet, different from the normal resonance of stone. A hollow sound where there should be solidity. The subtle displacement of air from a concealed opening. Information her newly awakened senses interpreted instantly, without conscious thought. Marco's look of realization as a crawler emerges seconds later from the hidden burrow he would have stepped over. His nod of acknowledgement. Her first lesson taught rather than learned. She in turn taught him how to survive the specific dangers of Axion 9. She showed him how to predict cave-ins from subtle vibrations in the rock, how to find tunnels with cleaner air by observing the growth patterns of the phosphorescent fungi that clung to the walls, how to move silently to avoid attracting the attention of the mutated creatures that inhabited the deepest shafts. A strange, fragile respect grew between them. Marco saw behind the mask of the ruthless queen a being desperately trying to understand a new, hostile world of sensation. Kyra saw in the weak human an incredible resilience born from vulnerability, a paradox her people had never understood. "Why do you help me?" she asked him one cycle, as they huddled in a relatively safe crevice, sharing body heat against the bone-deep chill of the lower mines. "I was your jailer." Marco was silent for a long moment before answering. "Because treating you as you treated us would make me like you were, and I've seen where that path leads." His words struck her with more force than any physical blow. For the first time, she began to understand the true nature of strength, not the absence of weakness, but the acknowledgement and mastery of it. Their fragile peace was shattered when they discovered a major cave-in blocking their path to the food distribution point. The only way forward was completely sealed by tons of rock and metal. It wasn't a natural collapse. The blast patterns were too precise, too deliberate. "Xander," Kyra said, examining the debris. "He's learned we've survived. He's cutting off our options." "This is the end then," Marco said, staring at the impenetrable barrier. "No," Kyra replied, surprising herself with her determination. "This is just another problem to solve." They searched the abandoned tunnels near the collapse and found an old forgotten drilling machine, a relic from the early days of the mine when automation had been the primary method of extraction. It was broken, its power cells drained and its mechanisms seized with corrosion. But Marco's eyes lit up at the discovery. "As a field medic, I learned anatomy, the workings of living things," he explained, already examining the machine's exposed circuitry. "But machines are easier. They don't scream when you get something wrong." For hours, he tinkered with its mechanisms while Kyra stood guard, her newly honed senses alert to any danger. She marveled at his deft movements, the way his hands seemed to understand the machine intuitively, coaxing life back into dead circuits. It was then that Xander attacked. He came in person, accompanied by a squad of elite Aegis guards, their armor gleaming in the dim light of the tunnels, their weapons humming with deadly energy. He had come to ensure their deaths personally, a testament to how deeply Kyra's continued existence threatened him. "Find them," his voice echoed through the tunnels. "Leave no corner unsearched." The battle that followed was short and brutal. Kyra fought as she never had before. In the past, she had relied on her invulnerability, charging straight ahead, ignoring blows that could not hurt her. Now she dodged, parried, used the environment to her advantage. Pain had become her ally, warning her of danger, telling her when to attack and when to retreat. She moved not like an invulnerable berserker, but like a deadly tactician, each movement calculated to maximize damage while minimizing risk. 3 guards fell to her improvised weapons and unexpected strategy before the sheer numbers began to overwhelm her. Xander cornered her against the wall of the tunnel, his power maul crackling with energy. His helmet was off, revealing a face so similar to her own. Cold, perfect, utterly without compassion. "You've disgraced our kind, Kyra," he roared, raising his weapon for a killing blow. "You've become weak, like these humans." At that moment, Marco finally succeeded in starting the drilling machine. A deafening roar filled the cavern as the massive drill bit tore into the wall adjacent to the cave-in, creating a new passage through the solid rock. "Kyra, run!" he yelled over the din. Xander, momentarily distracted by the noise, turned toward Marco. That split second was all Kyra needed. Fighting through the pain of her injuries, she struck not at Xander's armored body, but at the unstable rock formation above his head. The ceiling collapsed in a thunderous cascade, burying Xander and his squad under tons of rock and metal. Kyra barely escaped the collapse herself, diving through the new tunnel Marco had created with the drill. "You used the environment," Marco noted as they fled deeper into the mine, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. "You're learning." Their desperate escape led them to an abandoned command center, a forgotten relic from the early days of the prison, before automation had reduced the need for constant supervision. The equipment was old but functional, and here they found evidence of Xander's true crimes. He had been secretly selling prisoners to off-world interests, harvesting organs, and running illegal experiments. The accident for which Marco had been exiled was Xander's doing, a false flag operation designed to trigger conflict and increase the supply of prisoners. Most importantly, they found a way to contact the outside world, a subspace transmitter, old but still functional, capable of sending a signal that would bypass Axion 9's communications blackout. "We can expose him," Marco said. his eyes alight with hope for the first time since Kyra had known him. We can bring this whole system crashing down. But Xander, having survived the cave-in, realized where they were headed. He gathered all his loyal guards and set a trap, knowing they had discovered his secrets. In a final act of desperate self-preservation, he initiated the prison's self-destruct protocol, preferring to destroy all evidence along with them. "We have 15 minutes, Marco said, looking at the timer on the main terminal, his face illuminated by pulsing red warning lights. "It will be enough," Kyra replied, her voice steady with newfound resolve. But the self-destruct sequence was more than just a countdown. Throughout the facility, blast doors began sealing automatically, compartmentalizing the prison to contain the eventual explosion. Emergency protocols engaged. Atmospheric processors began pumping a paralytic gas into corridor segments, designed to immobilize prisoners during a riot or escape attempt. "We're being sealed in," Marco realized, watching a security schematic on the terminal. "All access routes to the landing bay are being locked down." "Xander is activating the riot protocols," Kyra confirmed, studying the flashing patterns. "He's redirecting the paralytic gas to flood our path." She pointed to a blinking section on the map. "We need to reach this auxiliary control station to override the lockdown." The journey became a desperate race against both time and the prison's automated defenses. Each corridor presented new challenges. Marco hacked access panels while Kyra used her strength to force partially sealed doors. When gas began flooding one section, they improvised filtration masks from torn fabric soaked in chemical neutralizers Marco quickly mixed from compounds in his pockets. "The gas density is highest near the floor," Kyra observed as they approached a particularly toxic corridor. "We need to stay elevated." Working together, they traversed the corridor by moving along ceiling-mounted maintenance rails, their bodies suspended above the swirling, paralytic vapors below. Marco's knowledge of chemistry and Kyra's physical strength complemented each other perfectly. Neither could have succeeded alone. At the auxiliary control station, Marco worked frantically to override the lockdown protocols while Kyra stood guard. Her enhanced senses, once a source of agony, now finely tuned, detected approaching footsteps long before they became audible to normal hearing. "Someone's coming," she warned. 3 sets of footsteps. Aegis armor configuration. Marco's fingers flew across the terminal. "Almost there. Just need to reroute the landing bay doors to emergency power and bypass the authorization codes." He pulled up a schematic of the facility's escape systems. "Main evacuation pod is here, in Bay 6. His finger traced to another location. "There's also an old maintenance pod in Sector Omega. Decommissioned, probably not in the system logs anymore. Might not even work, but..." "A backup plan," Kyra nodded, memorizing its location. "Worth knowing." The door to the control room shuddered as something heavy struck it from the outside. "They're breaking through," Kyra said calmly, positioning herself between Marco and the entrance. The door exploded inward, with a shower of sparks and twisted metal. In the opening stood Xander, flanked by 2 elite Aegis guards, whose armor bore the distinctive markings of Kyra's former personal guard. Sentinels she had handpicked for their absolute loyalty and exceptional combat prowess. "Override complete," Marco announced behind her. "Landing bay is accessible. We have a clear path to the escape pods." Xander stepped forward, his posture radiating contempt. "You won't leave this room alive, defective. Your contamination ends here." Kyra's attention was fixed on her former sentinels. "Merrick, Taven, you served under my command for 20 cycles. You swore oaths." The guards remained impassive, their weapons trained on her. "They serve strength, not weakness," Xander replied. "Just as all Aegis should. Your condition has removed you from the chain of command. You are nothing now." "Et tu, brute?" Kyra said softly, borrowing the phrase from the Earth literature Marco had described during their long hours in the mines. The human concept of betrayal had seemed alien to her then. Now she understood its bitter taste all too well. "We serve order," replied one of the sentinels, his voice modulated through his helmet. "Your weakness threatens that order." "No," she countered, shifting into a combat stance. "Your blind obedience threatens it. True strength comes from understanding, not ignorance." Xander signaled his guards. "Enough philosophy. Kill them both." The battle erupted in a blur of motion. Kyra engaged both sentinels simultaneously, using her intimate knowledge of their training against them. These were not ordinary guards, they were extensions of her own military philosophy, programmed with fighting techniques she herself had perfected. Meanwhile, Marco faced Xander, outmatched in strength but using the environment to his advantage. He lured the commander through a section of exposed wiring, where he triggered a power surge that temporarily disrupted Xander's armor systems. The Sentinels pressed Kyra hard, their coordinated attacks driving her back. One managed to slice through her defenses, opening a deep gash across her ribs. Pain flared, sharp, distracting, but she no longer fought to ignore it. Instead, she let it sharpen her focus, using the sensation to gauge the severity of her injury and adjust accordingly. "You fight differently," observed one sentinel, momentarily hesitating. "Not like an Aegis." "Because I see what you cannot," she replied, using his hesitation to close distance. With movements honed through weeks of survival in the mines, she struck at vulnerable joint sections in his armor, targeting connections she herself had designed. The sentinel fell, temporarily immobilized. The second pressed his advantage, forcing Kyra against a wall. His weapon, a vibro blade designed to cut through armor, arced toward her throat. "Kyra!" Marco shouted, throwing a canister toward her. She caught it reflexively, immediately recognizing the mining explosive they had used earlier to clear blocked passages. Without hesitation, she armed it and rolled it beneath the feet of the advancing sentinel. The localized explosion wasn't lethal, but it disrupted the sentinel's balance long enough for Kyra to disarm him. As she prepared to deliver a finishing blow, she locked eyes with her former guard through his damaged visor. "You were loyal once," she said. "You can choose again." Something changed in the sentinel's posture, recognition perhaps, or doubt. "The code," he began, "is incomplete without understanding," she finished. "Pain has taught me this." The sentinel lowered his head in submission, or perhaps consideration. Kyra left him where he knelt, turning to help Marco, who was now cornered by Xander. In the confusion, Marco and Kyra broke through to the main transmitter room. They needed to send the data to the Alliance, to expose Xander's crimes and the brutality of the entire Aegis prison system. But the transmitter was damaged, sparking dangerously as they attempted to activate it. "It needs a direct connection," Marco said, examining the exposed wiring. "Someone has to complete the circuit with their body. It's certain death." "I'll do it," Kyra said without hesitation. "This is my responsibility." "No," Marco stopped her, his hand gripping her arm with surprising strength. "Your body can't handle a shock like that. You don't have the filters anymore." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a resolve as absolute as her own had once been. "You taught me how to survive. Now let me teach you what's worth dying for." He stepped toward the panel, but Kyra pulled him back. A new idea had formed in her mind, one born from her unique understanding of both worlds. She took a vial of the same chemical compound that had once stripped her of her protection and handed it to Marco. "Smear this on Xander's hands when you get the chance. It will do to him what it did to me." Their plans set, they made their way to the evacuation bay where a single escape pod remained. But at the very exit, Xander was waiting for them. He had anticipated their route and positioned himself for a final confrontation. "Did you think I would let you leave?" he sneered, his armor scorched but intact. "Did you think I would allow you to spread your weakness?" He easily overpowered the wounded Kyra, throwing her against the wall with crushing force. Pain exploded through her body, but now she embraced it, used it to keep her mind focused, sharp. As Xander advanced on Marco, Kyra saw her opening. She had prepared for this moment, had secreted a vial of the same chemical compound that had stripped away her invulnerability. With practiced precision born from her weeks in the mines, she lunged forward, breaking the vial against her own hand. The chemical burned, but she was ready for the sensation now. She knew how to channel pain, to use it rather than be overwhelmed by it. When Xander turned back toward her, she didn't try to attack his armor or helmet. Instead, she grabbed his bare wrist, the small exposed section between glove and sleeve, and pressed her chemical-coated palm directly against his skin. Their eyes met through his visor, hers knowing, his confused. Then understanding dawned as the first shock of genuine sensation crashed through his nervous system. His eyes widened in an emotion no Aegis was supposed to feel. Fear. "This," she said as he fell to his knees, experiencing for the first time what he had inflicted on countless others, "is what pain teaches you." She took his weapon as he collapsed, writhing in sensory overload. Not in vengeance, but in necessity. The act wasn't merely tactical, it was poetically just. She had come full circle, using the very catalyst of her downfall as the instrument of her liberation. The self-destruct sequence continued its countdown, the facility beginning to shake with preliminary explosions. "Now run," she told Marco, pointing to the escape pod. "Transmit the data. Tell them what happened here." "And you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm staying. This is my people, my prison, my responsibility." There was no cold indifference in her eyes anymore. There was pain, wisdom, and a strength she had only found by becoming vulnerable. "Some debts can't be repaid from a distance." Marco hesitated only a moment, understanding the truth in her words. Then he nodded, entered the pod, and launched it towards safety, carrying with him the evidence that would shake the foundations of the Aegis Empire. The Alliance Council chamber was a stark contrast to Axion 9, a soaring, light-filled space designed to showcase the cooperation of 100 different worlds. Marco stood before the assembled representatives, his prison uniform replaced with simple civilian clothes that nonetheless couldn't disguise the haunted look in his eyes. "The data confirms that Commander Xander violated not only Alliance law, but Aegis codes as well," stated the council chairwoman, her holographic display showing fragments of the evidence Marco had delivered. "His trafficking operation caused the deaths of thousands, including citizens from 17 Alliance worlds." A military representative leaned forward, his uniform decorated with the insignia of numerous campaigns against the Aegis. "This is an opportunity to strike while they're in disarray. Their command structure is compromised. We should launch an immediate offensive." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Marco stepped forward. "With respect, Admiral, that would be a mistake." The Admiral's expression hardened. "They're our enemies. Why should we believe anything but the worst of them?" "Because I've seen their queen learn to cry," Marco replied simply. "I've witnessed an Aegis learn what it means to suffer, and through that suffering, discover compassion. One anomaly doesn't change the nature of a species," countered the Admiral. "It does when that anomaly spread," Marco insisted. "Kyra isn't alone. There are others questioning the old ways." "Others?" The chairwoman looked skeptical. "Your evidence suggests otherwise." Marco hesitated, then spoke of something he hadn't planned to share. "Before we reached the escape pod, a prisoner leader, a man called Bone Crusher, who had every reason to hate the Aegis, who had spent decades suffering under their rule, chose to help us. Not because he forgave, but because he recognized something had fundamentally changed. He saw that an Aegis could learn, could grow, could become something different than what they were programmed to be." He stepped closer to the council table. "If hatred can give way to understanding among those who suffered most, shouldn't we at least consider the possibility of change?" "You're suggesting we offer medical intervention rather than military action?" The chairwoman sounded unconvinced. "I'm suggesting we offer choice," Marco clarified. "The chance to experience what they've been missing, the full spectrum of what it means to be alive, including pain. Some will choose it. Those who do will never see the universe the same way again." The council chambers erupted in heated debate. Marco stood quietly at the center, no longer the prisoner or the rebel, but a bridge between two understandings of existence. He had left Axion 9 carrying evidence of atrocities, but returned with something far more valuable, the possibility of transformation. Against all odds, Kyra survived. As the facility began its final collapse, she fought her way to Sector Omega, remembering the old maintenance pod Marco had identified on the schematic. The pod was there, obsolete, forgotten, but functional enough for a one-way journey. She escaped just before the final detonation, the ancient pod systems barely holding together as it broke atmosphere. She did not regain her invulnerability. The chemical reaction had permanently altered her biology. Instead, she became the leader of a new faction of Aegis, those who sought to build a society not on strength alone, but on understanding and empathy. Years later, after a fragile peace was restored, Marco returned to Axion 9. It was no longer a prison planet, but a place of healing and rebirth. The facility that had once been designed to crush hope now stood as a monument to resilience, its architecture transformed, its purpose reimagined. He found Kyra in a garden she had cultivated on the site of the old parade ground, where she had once commanded absolute obedience. Flowering plants from a dozen worlds grew where blood had been spilled, their colors vibrant against the backdrop of reformed metal and stone. "You came back," she said, and there was warmth in her voice that would have been impossible in the queen she had once been. "I promised I would," he replied simply. He held out his hand. She took it, no longer afraid of touch, no longer seeing vulnerability as something to be despised. As they walked through the garden, a group of children played nearby. A mix of species including young Aegis, their pale skin catching the sunlight that now reached this once dark world. One child stumbled and fell, scraping her knee against the stone path. A cry of pain, clear, honest, unrestrained, rang out. The other children froze, watching uncertainly. Old instincts died hard. All eyes turned to Kyra. She approached the child and knelt beside her, movements fluid despite her own battle scars. With gentle fingers that had once commanded armies, she examined the scraped knee. "It hurts, doesn't it?" she asked softly. The child nodded, tears welling. "Good," Kyra said, her smile genuine. "It means you're alive." She leaned down and gently blew on the scrape. "Your body is talking to you. That's all pain is. A message." The child's tears stopped as quickly as they had started. Kyra helped her to her feet with a reassuring touch. "Be careful," she said, "but never be afraid to fall." As the children resumed their play, Marco stood beside her. His eyes fell on a prominent scar on her arm, a jagged line that hadn't been there when he'd left. "You've become quite the healer," he observed. "I had a good teacher," she replied, noticing his gaze on her scar. She traced the ridged tissue with her fingertips. "It still hurts sometimes, especially when the seasons change." A small smile touched her lips. "And that's good. It reminds me of the day I truly began to live." They continued walking in comfortable silence, two beings transformed by shared suffering and mutual understanding, beneath the open sky of a world that had once been hell and now offered the possibility of redemption.